Please join me in welcoming to the International Speaker Series stage, Shaun King.
Portland, what's up? Good to see you all. Thank you for coming out. Honored to be here. I mean that. I'm honored to be here with you at this time. I love Portland. I've been to Portland many times, and I kid you not, it has never rained a day I've been in Portland. So if I stay a few more days, it may be like a record drought if I stay. And so I love being here. I love being in the city. It's beyond being a beautiful place. It's a progressive place. Obviously, I know that doesn't mean it doesn't have challenges, and it does, and I'm aware of many of those challenges here in the city, and I'll talk some about those. But I'm thankful for the World Affairs Council of Oregon for having me here. Thankful for that warm introduction. And I'll be frank, I'm always still surprised when people invite me, because I'm always like, you do know what I talk about, don't you? And, you know, and they told me, you know, like this year of all years that, you know, not just inviting me, but things they're thinking about for the future. They're trying to not just broaden the speaker series, but reach all of Portland. And I appreciate that. And so thank all of you who spent your hard-earned dollars to be here. And, you know, the World Affairs Council spends that money in really wise ways to make a difference. And so I'm thankful, though, that everyday people spent their money to be here. I just left Dallas this morning, and I had a hard time leaving. I did not want to leave, and I want to talk for a few minutes about what I experienced in Dallas. I have a presentation. I have a lesson that I hope to teach you tonight. A tool that I hope to be able to leave you with that will help you understand how we got where we are in our society and in our world. It's a deeply problematic time in the history of our country. And I know when I tell you that, you're not like, really? Like Malcom Gladwell in his book, Blink, he talks about, the book Blink is really about your gut and about how in an instant there are moments where you have a thought, a feeling, and in the book Blink he unpacks how complicated and how accurate and how spot on that feeling, that gut feeling you can have in a moment, how it really took your whole life to build that thought that you have in an instant. As I've traveled the country, I've spoken all over the country and around the world over these past few years, particularly over this past year. Like, people have told me, like, you feel in your gut that where we are is not right. And I want to encourage you to lean into that feeling. And, you know, the bulk of my presentation tonight will be trying to help us understand why that feeling is very, very real. If you did not know, on Saturday night, this past Saturday night, there was a terrible incident of police brutality outside of Dallas in a town. It reminds me of Ferguson in the sense that I've never heard of this town before. And I had never heard of the town Ferguson and what I did not know is there was great injustice in Ferguson long before I had ever heard of it. And this town, Balk Springs, which is a suburb outside of Dallas, there is a good deal of injustice there that people are familiar with, and I've tried to share some of those stories. But at about 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, I got an email from a woman who said that her best friend's son had just been shot and killed by police, and that he was just a little boy. He was 15. He was just a brilliant kid, and she said that, you know, he was unarmed and nonviolent, had never been in trouble, and that his two older brothers, who were just 16 years old, were in jail, and they had shot and killed the young boy and locked up his brothers, and she was panicking. And I get ugly emails about injustice all the time. And it just so happened that I saw that one in real time and was just disturbed by what it was, and I immediately searched Twitter and looked on the news to see if I could find anything, and it had not made the news yet. And even I wondered there for a moment, like, is this real? In today's world, I get a lot of strange, fake emails from people just trying to throw me off. And I called a friend of mine, Lee Merritt, who's an attorney there in the Dallas area. And you like Lee? Yeah, I'll tell Lee. Lee will be amped that someone clapped for Lee. I'm gonna let Lee know. Lee, I said your name and somebody clapped. He will dig that. And Lee had already connected with the family, and he was at the jail. And I won't unpack the whole story, but I do want to give you the truth of what happened as I spent the past few days in Dallas and the past few days working with the family and their attorney. This young boy, Jordan Edwards, was a handsome young man, literally a 4.0 GPA his freshman year in high school, won a citizenship award, multi-sport athlete, and incredibly responsible. And his brothers are just like him. And the three of them together were really an unstoppable trio. And their parents, and for those of you who have, like you are a part of a set of siblings, their parents always felt good when the three of them went out, would let the three of them together go anywhere or do anything because they always had each other's back. So they went to a super lame house party on Saturday. House parties, by definition, are super lame in general. Out of all of my memories of house parties in high school, most of them were pretty bad. And so they literally went to one of those really bad high school house parties, and they took their dad's car with their dad's permission, and Jordan's older brother had just gotten his license, and too many people came, it is a house party. Too many people showed up, and they ended up just getting in their car and leaving. And as they were driving, this is how it happened. As they are driving down the road, an officer with an assault rifle shoots 3 bullets into their car, shooting Jordan in the forehead, killing him right there in the car. The boys literally your mind cannot catch up with the horror of the visual of what they saw and what they've experienced. They drove 1 block down and pulled the car over, and then police swarmed the car and arrested the boys. They had not broken any laws. They did not have guns or knives. They were not drinking. The car was properly registered. There was no crime committed. The police were literally called there because kids were loud in the neighborhood. And so police released a statement on Monday saying that when Jordan's brother had pulled the car out, in their statement, they said he did so aggressively and that he thought he was going to be run over, and he shot in the car. And there were 100 people there, and everybody said, no, that's not what happened at all. Everybody saw it. And the officers had on body cameras, and it proved their necessity. But the police released a statement saying that's what happened. And the police chief had not yet seen the body cameras, so he believed the officers who told him that. And then he looked at the body camera video, and that's not at all what happened. They had already pulled out of the driveway and were pulling out, and the officer fired not through the back window, but through the side passenger window. And the police chief came out on Tuesday and apologized for his misstatement and fired the officer. And we've been fighting for justice ever since, because that's not justice. Kill someone at your job, getting fired is not typically the response for that. And I'm under the impression that law enforcement should be held doubly responsible for following the law. for following the law. And so I spent yesterday with the family, and I wrote a story about it for the New York Daily News that was released today, and I hope you read it. And it was one of the hardest stories I've ever had to write. And I found myself, when I first got here, which is not normal for me, I found myself in a real funk, because I've worked with so many families who have deeply desired justice and deserved it, fought for it, marched for it, and didn't get it. And I can't speak for society, I can only speak for myself. I don't know what I'll do if this family doesn't get justice. I want to talk about that. I want to unpack it. I want to tell you how we got here, and I want to give historical context for where we are as a country and even what this means for the world. There we go. This man looks like he lived in Oregon a really long time ago. Yeah. He did not, but he definitely looks like he helped start the city of Portland. This is Leopold von Ranke, and he is called by a lot of people, he's called the father of the study of history. Now, you have to be careful, because if you Google father of history, that's like a theological term that's often used for God or the creator. He's seen as the father of the study of history. This portrait was probably in the mid-1800s. He was a German historian, brilliant man. He's seen as the father of the study of history because before Leopold von Ranke, people talked about the past. There were books about the past, but you could not get a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD in history. The academic field of history had not yet been formalized, and it was his specialty. He loved studying events of the past, and his thought was, if this is going to be a respected discipline, people should be trained in how to study history and how to teach history. We should create norms and rules and guidelines. And so he was really a pioneer in adding shape to how you studied the past. You could get a degree in economics or in classic literature, but you could not, before Leopold von Ranke, get a degree basically in the past, like a degree in the study of the past. It was something that people wrote about, but it was not a formal discipline. And he pioneered that. And one of the greatest things that he did in life was create a timeline of human history. Well, I did not know any of that. I was in grad school. I'd never heard of him. How many of you have heard of Leopold von Ranke? And don't lie. Did it? Okay, okay, I trust that, like 2 of you. Okay, thank you for being honest there. Because if a lot of you had raised your hands, I would know that Portland was a very dishonest city. I'd never heard of him. And I was in grad school, and I enrolled in this class, and the class was Introduction to Historiography. And if that sounds boring, the class was so boring. And I'm always hoping that my professor, I'm one class away from finishing this program, and I keep talking about this class, and I'm always hopeful that she just doesn't watch my lectures. If so, I'm going to have a hard time graduating the program. So don't share this on Facebook, and yeah. I enrolled in this class, and I immediately had the thought, for those of you who know how enrolling in college courses go, there's something called an add-drop period. And I was in the add-drop window where you were allowed to drop a class and add a replacement. And so I went online to see what I could replace this Introduction to Historiography class with. And there was nothing good there. Like, it was advanced badminton, like underwater volleyball. Like, there was nothing like that fit the program that I was in. So I knew that I was stuck in the course. And I went back to the course, and I looked, if we'll put his face back up. I went back, and I'm just telling you how it happened. I looked at his face, and I just had the thought, there is no way in the world that you have anything to teach me. And no, really, and I found myself, this is actually how it happened. I found myself not wanting to learn anything about him or from him. And I went home that evening, and I just asked myself, like, Shaun, why are you thinking this way? I have to take you back a little bit. That was in the spring of 2015. And in August and July of 2014, the summer of 2014, the fall of 2014, just a few months before I took this class, so much changed in our country. I was not doing what you know me for. I was not known as an activist. I had been an activist as a college student. Like, I literally owned my own megaphone. I was that guy. And one of the reasons I'm an activist today, in great part, is because most of my Facebook friends from college thought I was going to be an activist for my whole life. And every time I tried to not be an activist, my Facebook friends would send me stories about injustice, and they're like, you're an activist, do something about it. And I had, in a sense, I had moved on from activism. I got married. We have 5 kids. Yeah, that's a lot of kids. Yeah. Yeah, it's like you don't know. Yeah, there's no proper response for 5 kids. It's like either, like some of you said, ooh, some of you clapped, some of you silently felt sorry for me. Yeah, some people's mouths were wide open. There's no consistent response for when someone tells you they have 5 kids. And so, but in great part, because I was a father and because I was just paying the bills. I had a good job. I was working at an environmental charity here on the West Coast. I was living in California, working for a charity called Global Green. And I was the director of communications there. And I got an email from a friend of mine from college who knew me as an activist. And he said, Shaun, this is in July of 2014. He said, Shaun, there's something awful that's happened on a street corner in New York. And he said, some guy filmed this and put it on YouTube. It had not gone viral. It had not made the news. And my friend described it. And he said, man, there's a grown man, a black man who appears to be in his 40s or 50s, and he's telling the police to leave him alone. And he's begging them, please leave me alone. And he's not armed. He's not violent. And he said, while he's asking the police to leave him alone, an officer comes up behind him and begins choking him and then wrestles him to the ground and continues choking. I hadn't seen the video. My friend's describing it. And he said, man, you can see and hear the guy saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And he said the guy says it 12 times, and then he dies on the sidewalk. And I thought to myself, probably just like when I told you the story of Jordan Edwards, you might have thought there's got to be something more to this. I had that same thought. When my friend told me, I thought, there's got to be a missing piece here, like he had to have thrown a punch or had a gun, like there's something I'm not understanding. And I clicked on the link and I saw the video, and it was just as my friend described. Eric had actually just broken up a fight on that street corner, which was why the police were there. He was telling them, I'm not who you think I am. Leave me alone. They choked him, killed him. I saw the video of a man that we came to know as Eric Garner, and I can't explain what it did to me, but that story put its hooks in me. And I tried to shake it, and I could not stop thinking about it. And literally, I started doing a terrible job at Global Green for the next few weeks. But I had signed up for direct deposit, and it just kept hitting my account. And it had gotten to a point where for a few months, I did not deserve another paycheck from Global Green. But they kept paying me and paying me. And there was this weird mutual understanding that I knew and they knew that we would eventually have to have a very uncomfortable conversation on why I was no longer doing my work for Global Green. But they did not have the courage to fire me, and I did not have another job. And so, so I started fighting for justice for Eric Garner. And initially, my fight for justice was finding out how to illegally download the video from YouTube and trim it and add captions to it and post it on the internet. Post it on Twitter, post it on Facebook, send it via email. And I had the thought, and it sounds foolish now, but it made sense to me then. I had the thought, if people just see this video, somebody's going to be held responsible. The next day, literally, I learned that chokeholds had been banned in New York for over a decade. And I thought right there, it's the smoking gun. It's a banned, illegal move. And so literally, I did not know how to take screenshots of stuff that was on my screen. I took a screenshot of it. I shared the law. I tweeted it. I Facebooked it. I did not have a verified account. I was not working for the Daily News. I was just sharing it with my friends. In a matter of days, the story went viral. I was literally writing a story about Eric Garner when I got a text 3 weeks later from a friend of mine who lived in St. Louis, and he said, "Shaun, I see what you've been saying about this guy, Eric Garner." He said, "I'm sending you a live stream video." He said, "There's a neighborhood," that's how he described it, in St. Louis called Ferguson. And he said, "Right now, there's a kid laying on the street, and he's been shot and killed by police, and there's blood flowing down the street." And he said, "You can see it." And he said, "People are losing it." And I clicked on the link, and the anger and the fury and the pain was palpable. And I knew that what I was watching was about to really explode. People continued to live stream it. In a matter of hours, police, as people were grieving, police brought out German shepherds. And literally dogs were right in people's faces as they were spraying the blood off of the road. And I had the thought, oh my God. It had been 3 weeks since Eric Garner had been killed, and I had not heard of another story of police brutality in that 3-week window. I had the thought, oh my God, police are killing people like every 2 to 3 weeks. Then the next day, I learned of a story of a man in a Walmart named John Crawford who had been shot and killed by police. And in a couple weeks, we learned, and we did not know, most of the nation did not know, including most activists, did not know that in our country, it's not every 2 to 3 weeks, it's not every 2 to 3 days, but 3 to 4 to as many as 10 to 12 times a day, people are shot and killed by police in this country. We just did not know. We eventually saw numbers that in many developed countries around the world, they had gone years, entire countries had gone years without their police killing a single person. And we began fighting for justice for Mike Brown, for Eric Garner, for John Crawford. And then in November of 2014, before I took this class, I learned that a 12-year-old boy had been shot and killed named Tamir Rice, and he was a block from his house playing at a neighborhood park. And I had the thought, this is going to be that case where somebody is held responsible. And soon after Tamir Rice was killed, we learned that nobody would be held responsible for the shooting deaths of Eric Garner, the choking death of Eric Garner, the shooting deaths of Mike Brown and John Crawford. Eventually, we learned that nobody would be held responsible for what happened to Tamir Rice. In fact, in 2014, almost 1,100 people were killed by police, and 0.0% of them, none of them, were ever held responsible. And I found myself, as many activists found ourselves, slipping, I don't know if it was into a depression, but we found ourselves perplexed. And I can just speak for myself. I had never fought so hard for so many things and lost. Like for most of my life, my story was a story that if you fight like hell for something, you'll probably get it. When I first met my wife, I'm 37. I've been with my wife for 22 years. And yeah, you can clap. Yeah, that's a little better than the 5 kids thing. Doing a little better. When I first met my wife, she had a boyfriend. And I fought, not like fist fight, but I told myself, I'm going to fight for her. Did. She chose me. When I was a freshman at Morehouse, I ran for student government president and won. When I applied for grad school programs, I always got accepted. Like, in my young mind, if you fight and do it the right way, it works. And I realized that with injustice in America, that wasn't how it was going to work. Like, I thought we had fought hard enough and I believed in what we were doing, and nothing worked. And I found myself looking at this man's face, and I was thinking, man, what the hell do you have to teach me about the world that matters even a little bit for where I am right now? And it just so turned out he had a lot to teach me. And there's one key lesson that I learned from that class that I want to share with you. Leopold von Ranke created what was, in a lot of ways, the first detailed, exhaustive timeline of human history. And one of the first things that he did was he began to collect stories and stories and stories of thousands of people, every hero, every villain, every warlord, every president, every artist, every musician, every story he could find. Now, if you look here, a lot, like I see Chewbacca up here, and Chewbacca was definitely not on Leopold von Ranke's timeline of human history. I just recently saw Biggie Smalls up here as well. Like, I love this photo because it's just a random, eclectic photo of people throughout American history and some throughout world history. And initially, what Leopold von Ranke did looked a lot like this. He created, over a period of a few years, he created this eclectic collection of biographical narratives. And one of the reasons I love that Chewbacca is on here is Leopold von Ranke struggled. You have to realize, beyond the fact that there was no Wikipedia, there was no Google, no internet, for most of the world, there was no electricity, no telephone. There was very little international communication or travel. Like, he struggled sometimes when he would learn a story. Sometimes he struggled to know, is this a mythical story? Is this true? Like, so I imagine sometimes, like, if he got like a book about Chewbacca and just thinking like, this is a really weird, like, he struggled because the ways that we now verify if something is true or not, those ways were not available. Like, how many of you have ever seen an episode of The Walking Dead, right? So if you've ever watched The Walking Dead or any zombie apocalypse film or movie, like in The Walking Dead, which I enjoy, in The Walking Dead, it takes place in modern times, but they hardly even know what's going on in the next town. There's no radio, there's no email, there's no television, there's no paper being delivered. Like, if you remove the systems that allow you to know what's going on in the world, like in The Walking Dead, they have no idea at all what's going on in the next state. They certainly don't know what's going on in the next country. Now, I'm not trying to say that the 1800s were like the Walking Dead, but damn near, like it was almost The Walking Dead. And in that time, von Ranke struggled to find out who was real and who wasn't. So he created this eclectic collection of stories, and then he began placing them in chronological order. And this was his life's work. It did not take just a few years. It took several decades. It took him almost 35 years to build the timeline. And when he built it, he immediately saw a trend that freaked him out. And in a lot of ways, one of the reasons he wanted to build this timeline was he had the thought that there are some assumptions we are making about history that he did not feel that the hard work had been done to prove whether or not those assumptions were true. And one of those assumptions throughout history, it's not just the theory of evolution, there was this long-standing theory that human beings were getting better and better and better and better and better and better throughout time. And von Ranke himself fully believed that. And he had always believed it. And most historians throughout time, there are so many, and he even shared some of the documents of this notion that if you go back, if we, just for illustration purposes, think of the beginning of this block as early humans. The bottom left-hand corner here, these are the early humans. And if we think of the top right-hand corner up there as where we are today, Von Ranke would say that his thought before he built this timeline, his thought was that human beings were always getting better. But as he began to lay out the timeline, what he saw surprised him. What he saw was that we were almost correct. He found that it was indeed true, that our technology, and he said it like this. He said, you could build this timeline. This could be all of human history. This could be 1,000. This could be 1,000 years. This could be 100 years. He said, if you broke it down in any block like that, that technology was always getting better. Like he talked about how in the 1800s there was radical advancement in medical improvement and how surgeries were performed. He talked about advancements in transportation. Like, if you just think, when we think about the radical improvement of technology, just think about how much the telephone has changed in our lifetime. I speak on college campuses a lot, and I talk about how I dropped my teenage daughter off at school. This was like 2 years ago, and I dropped her off at school, and I told her to call me. And she said, Dad, what, okay, but why are you putting like the banana symbol, like, and then she said, Dad, that's like a Hawaiian, like, cool dude, like, you know, and she said, why are you putting that on your ear when you said call me? And I had literally, my mind had to catch up with it for a minute, and I realized that, like, for most of my young life, a phone kind of looked like that. But she has literally never used a phone that looked like that. And so when I said call me, like, she uses, like, here's a phone to her. Like, for like the first half of our lives, this would have looked like, we would have seen this and thought, deck of cards. Like, that's how old we are. Like, this is the shape of a deck of cards. But for her, so when I say call me and I do this, it's weird to her. Like, I remember when I first started calling my wife, there were no cell phones. When I first started calling her, in our house, we had one phone in the kitchen, and it was attached to my mother's wall. And there was no going back to the bedroom and having a private call. It had a long, curly cord on it. And when you wanted to have a private call, you would get that, and you would have to stretch that cord out. And depending on how long, you may remember, depending on how long, you probably never thought of this in a long time. If you stretch that cord out for a long time, like, when you were done, the cord would, like, lose its curl. But eventually it would curl up into, like, knots. And I remember sometimes I would call my wife, who was my girlfriend, and her mother also had a phone in her bedroom. And she could do the old mother trick and, like, also pick up the phone but push a button and listen to your call. Like, technology has improved significantly. Like, when you think about how much airplanes have improved over 100 years, or cars over 100 years, or the telephone, and what Von Ranke found was, it was true. Technology was getting better and better and better and better, but he said that people were confusing the steady improvement of technology with the steady improvement of humanity. And listen, what he saw was people would see this steady, consistent. Now, I don't know if this is the telephone. I don't know how to explain the Galaxy Note 7. It is a bit of an outlier. It's like still like burning holes in people's pockets. Every now and then there are exceptions to this rule, but by and large, technology gets better and better and better. And what Von Ranke found was human beings did not necessarily improve with their technology. Human beings thought they improved with their technology, but when he laid it out, what he saw was that wasn't the case. If you can't go to the next slide manually. This is an annotated timeline of the history of London. And as he laid timelines out for country by country, city by city, and he laid it out, at the end of 35 years, what he decided was that humanity did not look like a steady incline, but it actually looked like a series of peaks and valleys. What he would find is that sometimes human beings were amazing. And sometimes they were absolutely terrible, and them being amazing and terrible did not unfold in chronological order. He found entire periods of human history that sounds like fiction to me. He found entire periods of human history where there was no war. I don't mean like a few weeks. He found periods, eras of human history where there was virtually no war, no colonialism, where people by and large stayed within their borders. It was not human perfection, but he found periods of human history where people were cooperative and collaborative. And that could be represented in something like this peak. And then it would seem as if all the lessons that they learned while they were cooperative and collaborative, all of that would come crashing down. And then they would get better again and crash back down again. And what he found was humanity was not this steady incline in quality. Technology improved like that. But over time, humanity looks more like this. But that no matter what he said to people, people always wanted to believe that they were doing it a little better than the last. Let me see if I can go back and show you. No matter what, this generation wants to believe that they improved it over this generation, who improved it over this generation, and this one and this one. There's something in us that wants to believe we're doing it better than those who came before us. Psychologists have even talked about it. There's something innate in us that wants to believe we're doing it better. But as he laid out the facts of it, that's just not how it is. It looks much more like this. Now, I'm not saying that that peak is Barack Obama and that this valley is Donald Trump. But I'm not saying that peak is Barack Obama and that valley is Donald Trump. But I may be saying the second peak is Barack Obama, and there are peaks and valleys in humanity. You know this. Listen, because if this is how humanity unfolds, and these are the early humans, and that's us up in the top right-hand corner, that would mean Donald Trump is peak humanity. That's like a joke that just tells itself. This is where, Donald Trump jokes sell really well in Portland, and so this is where I tell a few Donald Trump jokes. I very seriously, and I'm not even joking, I don't think that Melania thinks Donald Trump is peak humanity. And because, listen, ladies, this is going to be very gross, but imagine for a moment, I'm sorry to put this on you, imagine for a moment, for some peculiar reason, you had married Donald Trump. I know you hate me now. It is a terrible thought. Imagine you married Donald Trump, but he moved to Washington, D.C., and you lived in a penthouse in Manhattan that overlooks Central Park. Would you move to D.C. with him? Just be real. Would you move or would you stay in your penthouse in Central? Yeah, you would stay. She does not believe he is peak humanity. She is saying. Even as the PR on, every day they're releasing the cost of her staying, and she's like, I'm fine with that. I'm staying right here. As a matter of fact, today is the first day of his presidency that he's even come back to New York. I don't know what's going on there, but it is a little peculiar. At the very least, I'm speaking about the steady improvement of humanity. I knew for sure that Donald Trump was not peak humanity. He issued this Muslim ban, and it got swatted down by court after court after court after court. And we protested all around, including here in Portland. And he wrote a tweet, and the tweet said, "See you in court." And I had the thought, like, man, you really need to stay away from court because you are losing in court after court after court. And I had the thought, this is probably going to be one of the dumbest tweets that he writes. There have been some bad ones, right? I mean, there have been some serious, but then literally the next day he did a press conference with the Prime Minister of Japan. And there's this really weird thing. The Prime Minister of Japan speaks Japanese. Mind-blowing, right? Mind-blowing. And they do a press conference together, and the Prime Minister of Japan is speaking Japanese. And for 15 minutes during the press conference, Donald Trump looks at him, nods his head yes, sometimes no. And then members of the press realized that he did not have his translation headphones on. And for almost 15 minutes, he had pretended to know Japanese. And so I did a Twitter poll asking people, what is worse, telling judges that just ruled against you, see you in court, or pretending to know Japanese? And it was literally like a 50-50 split. He is not peak humanity. Like that is, if so, how depressing would that be? If he is the best we will ever have. Like, that's not true. That's not true, and this is not how time unfolds. This is how time unfolds. And if this is how time unfolds, we have to ask ourselves, where are we? Where are we? In the scheme of history unfolding. If this is not how it works, if it works the other way, how do we explain this? Listen, if history unfolds like this, if we're getting better and better and better and better, how do we explain him? How do we explain this? This is a diagram from the transatlantic slave trade. This is not a modern rendering, but an actual diagram where they tried to determine exactly how many human beings they could fit onto a ship. This was not a blip in human history, but this took place over 350 years. Where not thousands, not single millions, but tens of millions of people were bought and sold alongside spices and rugs. And it was so profitable that they wanted to determine how many people can we fit. Because here's the thing, if this is how history unfolds, this right here, the transatlantic slave trade took place about midway through the final bar of human history. So if we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this happening in the scheme of history? This was yesterday. How do we explain the wounds on his back? If we're getting better and better and better, if this is how history unfolds, how do we explain these men who survived the Holocaust? In Portland, there are at least 2 known survivors of the Holocaust here. And survivors of the Holocaust this very day continue to speak out on injustice that they see, and particularly survivors of the Holocaust spoke out against the Muslim ban. In the scheme of history, this was like literally in the scheme of human history, this took place like almost at the end of this bar. This was not here or here or here or here. This took place in the scheme of history. This is here where we are supposed to have arrived. How do we explain this? This is an enormous, outrageous pile of shoes of men and women who were brought in to the concentration camp. And as their bodies perished, the shoes remain, and they have left them there to this very day for people to see. If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain Rwandan genocide? Because on this diagram, that takes place almost at the corner, where 1 million people, over 1 million people, were hacked to death in almost 90 days. Everybody in this room, except for some of the youngest children, we were alive when this happened. We explain all of this. This is at a Rwandan genocide museum. We explain this because this is not how time unfolds. This is how time unfolds. And if this is true, which I deeply believe it is, and it's what von Ranke found as he laid out a timeline of human history, if this is true, we have to answer the tough question of where we are and what will we do about it. Because here's the thing, I am 100% sure we are not at that peak. And not a single one of us in here believes it. I knew we were not at that peak when I watched a press conference today. And not a press conference, it was a party on the White House lawn of 100 almost exclusively white men cheering at the destruction of Obamacare. One, it barely passed the House. It's like, I wondered, have you taken Civics 101? It has not yet passed. Celebrate what? And what are you celebrating? Like, and when you push any single conservative who voted against it today, tell us how this will make health care better for America. Literally, I saw video after video of those same people who voted for it running away, literally running away from interviews today. Desperately not wanting to answer the question of it. One interviewer was hounding them, just saying, have you read the bill? Have you read it? And none of them wanted to answer it because they had not. Like, we know, you know, we're not there. The quality of our humanity is in one of these dips. Here's what I know. Last year, 102 fully unarmed African-American men, women, and children were killed by American police. I'm talking no knives. We even removed, there was a man who was shot and killed by police in Mississippi who had a serving spoon. We took him out of this number. There was a man fighting through a schizophrenic episode in Miami who had a broom and was shot and killed by police. And we took him out of this number. Every one of these 102 men and women, husbands and fathers and sons and daughters, they were all completely unarmed. You would have to go back. Does anyone know who this is, the 25th president? You want to guess? No, not Harding. I heard, yeah, thanks for the loud McKinley. Put your hand up. Where are you? Yeah, I see you. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I heard another McKinley over here too, I thought, right? It's President William McKinley, and man, it must suck to be the person that everyone says you're Harding and you're everyone. I spoke at a college, and I kid you not, someone yelled out Jimmy Carter, and they were not joking. I kid you not. And she was not joking. It's like, well, that's frightening. That is frightening. She did say Jimmy Carter. And I thought long and hard about, like, because I saw who said Jimmy Carter, and I thought for a second, like, the comedian in me wanted to be like, did you say Jimmy Carter? And I just let it go. It was like, she does not need to be singled out for saying Jimmy Carter. You would have to go back to 1902, when McKinley was president, to find the last year in this country where 102 African Americans were lynched. And what is lynching? Lynching is the extrajudicial killing of someone. It is denying someone their right to a judge and a jury. It is denying them due process. And when police in our country, particularly when they are faced with someone who is completely unarmed, but that person still comes out dead, in essence, that is a modern-day form of lynching. And we would have to go back to when he was president. The deadliest hate crime. I want you to know where we are right now in human history, in American history. The deadliest hate crime against African Americans in almost 90 years did not take place in the 50s or 60s, but took place when Dylan Roof walked into a church in Charleston, sat through the entire Bible study, then shot and killed the pastor and 8 other people. You live in the age where a more lethal hate crime against African Americans has not taken place in 90 years until our time. That's where we live. If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? How do we explain the absolutely exploding prison population, which is also a problem here in Portland and in Oregon, by the way, a significant problem? That for most of American history, there are under 200,000 people in jail or prison. It's absolutely exploded. How do we explain this? If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain that we have the highest rate of imprisonment, not only of any country in the world, we have the highest rate of imprisonment of any country in the history of the world. Right now, we currently incarcerate more people, percentage and total, than South Africa did during the height of apartheid. Right now, that's where we live. This is your country. This is our country. If we're getting better and better and better, I want us to look quickly at a few videos together. I want us to see if we're getting better, how do we explain this? Have you seen this? This is in McKinney, Texas. In a second, I'm going to pause it and explain what we're seeing. Yeah. To the video, guys, you can manually pause this for me, okay? Because the pause button doesn't work. Did you see him pull his gun out? This is a pool party. A pool party. What just happened here is a uniquely black experience. I would be completely shocked, and I literally have scoured every tool available to find a comparable incident like this that has ever happened such that a young white girl in a two-piece bikini is assaulted and arrested from a pool party. They were not smoking, they were not drinking, they were not having sex, they were not being inappropriate. They were at a pool party. In fact, many of the children there live in the neighborhood. I don't know if you have this in Portland, but in Dallas, big neighborhoods have clubhouses and swimming pools. And you're allowed to invite your friends, and many of the kids live there. And this happened. Like, how are we getting better and better and better when this is happening? How are we getting better if this is happening? Have you seen this? She had her cell phone out in class. He threw her about 6 feet across the room. That's Officer Ben Fields. He's the strength and conditioning coach. He's a police officer, but he's also the strength and conditioning coach for the high school football team. She had her cell phone out in class. The teacher asked her to put it away, and she puts it away. He then decides, no, I want your cell phone. She's a foster child living with a foster family, and he did not understand the emotional attachment she had to that phone. Under no circumstance was she going to give that phone up. She did not argue about it. She did not shake her head. She did not have attitude. She put the phone away, and when he asked for it, she just froze up. And it weirded the other students out. Like, they didn't know her very well. This was the beginning of the school year. And the teacher called the principal to send someone down to get her, and the principal called the police for having her phone out. She gets arrested, and so does the young lady, another young black girl, for filming it. This is America. This is a Donald Trump rally. This man in the red hat is Matthew Heimbach, a well-known white supremacist. Pause it if you can in the back. I wrote the first story. This is how weird my life is. People now save my email address, strangers, save my email address in their phone so that if something bad happens to them, they can email me about it. I've never met her. She emails me literally right outside of this arena. She is not even there as a protester. She's at a Donald Trump rally in Louisville, Kentucky. He's still running for the Republican nomination. And he audibly, Donald Trump, if we turned it all the way up, is telling people to get her out. Some people there thought she was a protester. She was not there as a supporter. She was really just there as a spectator. Louisville, Kentucky is incredibly boring. And she had the thought, she was so brilliant. She told me back in March that her parents are from Nigeria, and her dad had told her, like, this guy could win. And her dad had seen many men like Donald Trump rise into power, and she was convinced he could, and she just wanted to see it for herself. And this man, who, on the left, I wrote the first story about this incident, and he is actually suing Donald Trump now, him and several other men, because Donald Trump promised he would pay for their legal expenses. It's gonna be a long time getting that money, boss. It's like you get in line. There's a long line of people that filed that same suit. I wrote the first story about it, and I was so. Are there any veterans in the room? Any veterans? I was so frustrated. I said, how could a military veteran do this? And literally, a communications officer from the military wrote me and said, we need you to make a little addition to your story. This man's not a veteran. He just dresses like one. He is like, it's called cosplay. It's like senior citizen cosplay. I did not know that was a thing. I'm not being ageist. I just did not know people did that at that age. I did not know. Real talk. Just think about it. He loved the way people treated him when he would wear that uniform. Imagine wearing it to a Donald Trump event. People were bowing down. Like literally, people were worshiping the ground this man walked on. It's just a costume. This next video is from a Donald Trump event in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's the last video that I'll show you. This man actually was a protester. Did you see what happened there? The protester is being escorted out. If you see at the top, I want you to see the men in the brown shirts. Those are sheriffs from the county. You can see the sheriffs looking right at it. I want to unpack something. The white man in the hat is there at the Donald Trump rally. He walks up to the black man, throws an elbow on his orbital bone, shatters the man's orbital bone. He falls down. They then arrest the black man and allow the white man to go back to his seat. And then I used to say, how many of you have been to Oakland before? I spoke in Oakland, and I said, yeah, I love Oakland, so yeah, shout out to Oakland. But I spoke in Oakland, and I said, man, there's not a black man in America who in front of all these police officers would throw their elbow. And there was a brother from Oakland who came up to me at the end. He was like, I don't know, bro. I would throw the elbow. He's like, I don't know, bro. I would throw the elbow. And I said, no, that's not what I meant. I said, there's not a black man in America who would throw the elbow in front of police and then expect to have a seat afterwards. And he was like, yeah, you're right. And so he throws the elbow and has a seat, and then he does this interview. Listen, crank it up.
Yeah? What'd you like about it?
Knocking the hell out of that big mouth. We don't know who he is, but we know he's not acting like an American.
So you deserved it?
Every bit of it.
What was that?
Yes, he deserved it. The next time we see him, we might have to kill him.
Not only did he threaten to kill him, but he did so on Inside Edition. And did you notice, I wrote one of the first stories about this man. Did you notice he said, if we see him? Who was he talking about there? Like, I had to wonder, like, okay. And even I did a survey about this story about a year ago. That is such a peculiar thing to say. If we see him again, we might have to kill him. Like, I had the thought, has this man killed somebody before? Like, it sounds comical, but it's like, that's a strange thing to say. I want to suggest to you that his cavalier attitude, the incident in McKinney, Texas at the pool party, what happened to Jordan Edwards on this past Saturday night, all of that is a result of where we are right now. I believe we are in a dip in the quality of our humanity. This is where we are. I'm closing in a few minutes. We have some amazing questions that we'll take, and many of you have submitted them, but it's important to understand that we're here, because if you don't accept it, we could be stuck there for a very long time. As I study, I'm a historian by training, as I study themes throughout history, when there were deep, ugly dips in the quality of humanity, it was people's willingness to fight their way out that determined how long that dip lasted. And so, here's the crazy part. Dips can last for years. Like in our mind, and I think we're wrong, we're thinking this dip is going to last about 4 years. Because we have timed this dip along with what we think is one presidential term. But I want to suggest to you that this dip, Donald Trump, he is a symptom of the dip. The dip already existed before he was elected because we are already in it. Right? If you think he is the sole cause of where we are right now, you are grossly misunderstanding where we are. We live in a country where 17 women came forward, none of them asking for a dime, saying that he had either sexually assaulted or harassed them. Then he was recorded before the election, not like after he's elected, before he was elected. He is recorded saying he used his power and his privilege. Had he just said this, it's gross and nasty to kiss women who did not want it. But then he said he grabs women by the genitals. It's like, what? And got elected. I want you to understand, that happens in a dip. Like, that's how he wins. And here's how I know we are in a dip. Did you see ABC, Washington Post released a poll last week? And in the poll, one of the things they had a head-to-head against Hillary Clinton. And he won by an even larger margin if it was held today. And in the poll, which Democrats all over the country shared, it did say that he was the least popular president at this point in his term. But in the very same poll, guess who was less popular than him? The Democratic Party. He was at around 40%, and the Democratic Party was around 37%. We are in a dip in the quality of humanity in this country, around the world. I was speaking in Oakland and in Stockton this past week, and I had 4 young Somali students come up to me almost in tears because they felt like they wanted to know why I was not speaking out more about what was happening in Somalia. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had a student from Yemen who said, "Shaun, why are you not speaking about what's going on in Yemen?" And the reality is that each of those, and I get the same thing. I get people who say, "Shaun, why are you not every day speaking about what's going on in Syria?" And someone else said, "Why are you not speaking every day about what's going on in Palestine?" And there's so many crises around the world. But a few things have happened. Donald Trump has completely sucked the wind out of the news cycle, and that is simultaneously his fault and the media's fault for not telling the story of where we are. I'll close with these 2 thoughts. I would love for you to go back and read the Atlantic Magazine's endorsement of Hillary Clinton. It's important, not because of the quality of the endorsement. It's eerie to read it now, and it's timely to read it 100 days or so later. when they endorsed Hillary Clinton, it was not a super quality endorsement. And they even said the title of their endorsement was, "We Must Stop Donald Trump." Like that, it wasn't, "Wow, Hillary Clinton is awesome." It was, "We must stop Donald Trump." And in their endorsement, they said, I did not know this, but Atlantic Magazine has been a continuous publication since 1858. And in their endorsement, they said they had only endorsed 2 presidential candidates since 1858. They had endorsed Abraham Lincoln. And literally, they republished the endorsement. And it's all in the Hillary Clinton endorsement. You can see it. And in their endorsement of Abraham Lincoln, they said, literally, "We think our country is about to be split in 2. And they were right. And they said, "We believe there's one candidate who could save the Union and possibly end slavery in the process." And then they waited 104 years before they endorsed another presidential candidate. And they endorsed Lyndon Johnson in 1964. And in their endorsement of Lyndon Johnson, they said that under normal circumstances, he would not be the type of candidate they would endorse, but that the president had just been assassinated. John F. Kennedy had just been killed. Many of you were alive and you remember it. And literally in their endorsement of Lyndon Johnson, they said, "We believe again, like we believed 104 years ago, that our country could be split in 2 in many different ways, including on the issue of civil rights. And we believe that Lyndon Johnson will continue where John F. Kennedy left off, and we believe our country deserves that." They endorsed Lyndon Johnson, and he won. And he got the country, they thought the country was in, they believed the country was in a dip, and he voted and signed, rather, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. That was not Kennedy, but Johnson. And then 4 months ago, Atlantic Magazine's editorial board said there were 3 times in American history that freaked them out enough to break their rules on presidential endorsements. One was the Civil War. I understand that. One was the Civil Rights Movement. That makes a lot of sense. And one was now. You live in that moment. And I had always wondered, I'm 37, and so I was born just about 10 years after Dr. King was assassinated. And I'd always wondered as a kid, who would I be if I was alive during the Civil Rights Movement? Would I march? Would I be a freedom rider? Would I fight for justice? I always wondered. And I've gotten to the point where, we don't know. I don't know who I would be or who you would be if we were alive then. But I have learned enough about where we are right now to believe that the greatest indicator of who you would be in the Civil Rights Movement is who you were yesterday. What did you do today? Like, I'll close with this thought. If you aren't fighting your way and our way out of the dip now, you probably would not have fought in the Civil Rights Movement. If you are chilling out and letting the world pass you by right now, it's a great indication that that's who you or I would have been then. This moment, where we are right now, in this country and in this world, it needs you to stand up in every possible way you know how. It requires that of you. Well, come on. I want to take as many questions as we can. And I hope in those questions we'll get to what you can do. Thank you. Thanks, man. Thank you. Thank you. All right, y'all have a seat so we can get these questions. And I'm a little hungry too, so y'all need to sit down. My time zones are all messed up. So in my mind, my stomach is saying, you should have had dinner 3 hours ago. And so in a minute, I get cranky when I get really hungry. So in a minute, you'll be like, I thought I liked him, but I don't like him as much as I thought I liked him.
Thanks, Shaun, for that amazing
Thank you, man.
presentation. My name is Derek Olson. I'm the president of the World Affairs Council of Oregon, and I'm going to moderate a few questions that we got from the audience. Thanks for the great questions. We'll jump right into it. In the whitest large city in America, how would you counsel us to work with our police force to build a constructive relationship with our black and brown communities?
That's a great question. So, I could spend, I think we have 20 or 25 minutes. I could spend all 25 minutes just answering that question. And so I said to say that I won't spend all 25 minutes, but I wrote a series on, I think it's the most important thing I've ever written on how we can solve the issue of police brutality and police discrimination in America. It's a 25-part series. I pinned it on the top of my Facebook page, and all of the solutions are based in deep research, and I have the links to academic studies and the like. Truthfully, I listed out 100 solutions and pared them down to 25. Here's the thing. When I fight for a lot of these solutions, police don't listen. And when black folk fight for a lot of these solutions, it tends to get pushed aside. And there's this weird trend in America where people who experience discrimination end up being the primary people expected to also solve that discrimination, which is weird because it doesn't really work. And so, for instance, in America, the primary people who are fighting against sexism are women. And that's essential. Women are fighting against sexism out of necessity. The primary people fighting against racism are people of color, and they're fighting against it out of survival. But until men fight against sexism, and until white folk fight against racism, we'll have some progress, but it's minimal. And I don't just mean fight against it, but I mean like owning it, saying, yeah, this is my problem. I created this. I benefit from this. And for instance, I say this, as a man, it took me 10 years into my adult life until I realized how I benefited in society from systems of patriarchy and sexism. I didn't know. And privilege is that way. So when I talk about white privilege and other forms of privilege, most of us who have privilege aren't aware of it because you just live in that system. And as a man, I had no idea. I was completely unaware of the ways I was benefiting from privileges as a man. I just did not know. And it took me, surrounding myself with women who would tell the truth about myself and the truth about the world for me to understand it. But in Portland, its reputation for being progressive does not really match its reality in a lot of painful ways, and particularly to the black residents of Portland who love Portland, it stings because it's one thing if you, white folk who live in Portland, if you knew it sucked for a lot of people, but when you don't know that it really feels a certain kind of way for a lot of people and act like it does feel great, it hurts. And so, secondly, I said that to say that first you have to fight to solve these problems like they're your responsibility because they are. Secondly, a lot of it is sincere, active listening and allowing people to describe for you the problems and the pain that they experience in the city so that you can fully understand it. And there's not enough of that. And for me, I will put myself back in there. It was not until I listened to my Muslim friends that I understood the pain of Islamophobia. It was not, and inherent in what I'm saying is you have to have Muslim friends to listen to Muslim friends. Like, it was not until I listened to, like, I'm a heterosexual man, but I fight against homophobia and discrimination against the LGBTQ community, like I wrote an article saying, like, just pretend I'm gay. Assume when you are around me, the way you speak about me, the way you treat me, just treat me like I'm gay. Like, don't assume, because what I started noticing, because people assumed I was straight, I noticed that people would tell homophobic jokes around me. It was like, why are you assuming that that's okay? And it was not until I listened to people and understood the pain that they experienced that I thought, because most of my life I never spoke out against homophobia. Part of me thought other people are doing that. It didn't require me to do it until I realized that it stung people for them to get the impression that I saw the problem and didn't say anything about it. And so you have to listen, but then you have to speak,
Right. Are there any countries that are examples of how police departments and court systems should function fairly for all of its citizens?
Well, let me see if I can, if you can bring up the slides real quick. I'm going to go back and show you something real quick, if you don't mind going back to it. I'm going to go back as far as I can here, if it'll let me. 1 second. Just trust me, it's going to be worth it when I get it up here. Almost there. Almost. Right there. A lot of people, man, when a lot of people see this, they make a mistake and they say, gosh, our justice system is broken. And you look at that and I get that conclusion. It's like, how in the world could it go from this? Because crime did not explode. What exploded was prosecution. And a lot of people look at this massive explosion in incarceration, and they say the system is broken. And I tell people, no. This system is functioning exactly as it was designed to function. I'll show you when the system was broken. If we could go all the way back to the beginnings of American history, and it always stayed below 200,000. You'll see a little blip right there where from 1958 to 62, it barely goes above 200,000 people in jail, and then it corrected itself and goes back under 200,000. That's a broken system. That's a system that has some flaws. That's not a broken system. This was built to do that. This was done on purpose. And so we have to first accept that our system is not a good system with a few flaws. It's a terribly designed system that has to, in a lot of ways, be completely reimagined and rethought and rebuilt. And while that idea is very exciting, the reality of doing that is incredibly difficult. And so when we look particularly at, and I will say, I have many friends who are for the abolition, the complete removal of jails and prisons, and I get that. But I accept it, and I understand the spirit of it. But I think no matter what, we should, like right now there are almost 3 million people incarcerated. This does not include American jails. Like I've worked in jails and prisons, and I don't say this as a joke or it's not a punchline. Some people need to be incarcerated. I worked for almost 4 years in the prison system, and some people need maybe a more humane form of incarceration. But we do need in our country, jails and prisons, but not as we have them. Now, literally, other countries, particularly when we think about Scandinavian countries, their thought is, how can we rehabilitate people? And the system is designed not as punishment, but as rehabilitation. And what we have is a system that's built on punishment that we claim is designed to rehabilitate people. And it just doesn't work at all. And so the better question would be, Shaun, can you name 5 countries that are doing it worse than us? And Every other country is doing, besides those 5, everybody else is doing it significantly better. And if there's any good news in that, it's that we have massive room for improvement in how we do this. Yeah. There's a high ceiling there.
How do you explain police brutality to people in white rural areas of America?
That's a good question. Now, depending on where you are in our country, police brutality is not an exclusively black experience. Like, for instance, I was shocked when I learned that the highest rate of police brutality is actually slightly higher than African Americans is against Native Americans, which blew my mind when I found that out. And so in many rural, like there was this, we hired this guy at the Daily News, and his nickname, I did not give him this nickname before anybody gets mad. His nickname is the Liberal Redneck. And he did this video on police brutality. And he said, and he is a very country, rural guy, right? And in this video he said, when did he talked about, like, when did those of us in rural America, when did we start acting like police brutality was not a thing? And he talked about all the issues of police brutality he had seen. I have written many stories about people in rural America who have experienced it. I'll give a quick story about something that happened with Glenn Beck as an answer to your question. Glenn Beck is somebody, he has attacked me many times on his show. He does this thing with a chalkboard, and he had some brilliant chalkboard artist draw like the flames of hell, and it had a picture of my face right in the middle of it. And I admired how nice the flames were, but I was bothered that my face was in it. And so I said that to say that I'm about to give Glenn Beck a compliment, and that requires personal effort on my part. So Glenn Beck had spoken out against the Black Lives Matter movement and had dismissed police brutality many, many times. And he lives in the Dallas area, and he met a black family in Dallas who had called 911 for medical help as their son was having a mental health emergency, and they wanted an ambulance to come. Well, instead of dispatching an ambulance, they dispatched a police officer, and the officer shot and killed their son right there in the living room. Which, by the way, a lot of people in Portland, one of the things they're fighting about is the inhumane treatment of people by police of people with mental illness. And Glenn Beck, he was deeply moved by what they told him. And he had an epiphany in a moment. He wrote about it in an op-ed in the New York Times and other things. A lot of people are skeptical of him, and I am still skeptical of him. But I believe he had a moment. And in that moment, it was where he realized that if one of his children had had a medical emergency, a mental health emergency, and the ambulance would have come to the house, that wouldn't have happened. And the moral in that story is, it was the human contact. It was him learning. It was him learning the human story, seeing the pain in these people's eyes, that he just couldn't shake it. And unfortunately, the way a lot of people, if you learn about police brutality, or if you learn about the Black Lives Matter movement from people who are skeptical that either exist, then it won't move you. And so people have to be able to have these human narratives unfold, and we don't do a good job at telling the human cost. So like the story, I hope that all of you, it's on my Twitter and Facebook timeline, read the story that I wrote about Jordan Edwards today, because what I tried to convey is the human cost. Like I sat down at the dinner table with his father last night, his father Odell. He and I both are 37 years old. And Odell had held it together through our whole conversation. And it was a really rough conversation. And then Odell had remembered that he had just bought Arena League football tickets for them to go to a game tomorrow. and it just crushed him because he had not thought about, what do I do? Do I still take my other boys to the game, or do we never go to another? I mean, and he broke down, and it's that when people see, it's like, yeah, that hurts. It's the human experience that goes across political divide, and when people see this is a dad who's just grieving that he has an extra ticket that he now is not going to be able to use, and that's something that even Glenn Beck could understand, you know? Yep.
Do you ever feel threatened or like a target because of your activism and the fact that you portray the negatives that many try to hide or ignore?
Yeah, I could just say yes, and we can move on to the next one.
Yep.
It is, I get a lot of threats, and I take some steps to protect myself, but it's an ugly fact of what I do every day, and sometimes the threats are worse than others, and sometimes I don't talk about a lot of them because experts have told me in talking about them, it'll actually make it worse and more people will do it. That if people got the idea that it bothered me, more and more people would do it. But it's disturbing, and it's a sign of that dip that we're in. Like I get death threats every single day, and so much so that if I went through the process of reporting all of them to the police and the like, it would be all that I would do. And so a lot of them we just dismiss and move on, and it's hard to know, like, are these people just trying to stress me out, or are they serious? And so it's terrible that we live in, and it's not just me, but many of us who get them, and it's a familiar time. You'll hear Dr. King and others talk about the threats that they received, and so it's ugly that it's that way, but it is.
You talked a little bit about your posting of the videos. Got a question here. Do you have the thought that internet technologies make it possible to learn these things that weren't known about police brutality, and that you could use the possibility of going viral with solutions?
I think I understand it. Could you rephrase that for me? I
Yeah.
just want to make sure I nail it properly.
I think just the idea that maybe that some of these things were happening, but that people didn't know about them because they weren't seeing them viral, and that you might be able to help have a solution go viral.
Oh, yeah. I wish that was the case. Like, for instance, I shared a video, first as a bit of a footnote. Almost every video of some type of brutality that I share, the family who has experienced that brutality asks me to share it. And so people see it, and because I get critics who say, I wish you would never post these videos, but it's the belief of a lot of families that if these videos aren't posted, no one will be held responsible. And in fact, in the very few instances where police are held responsible for brutality, even if it's a monetary settlement or being terminated or fired, a video almost always exists. Even in the case of Jordan Edwards, that officer was fired because the police chief went and looked at the video. And so I share the videos not out of any, I hate the videos because I hate the brutality. I share them with the hope that people will see them. So I shared a video on my Facebook timeline on Monday of this young boy in high school getting choked by a police officer there in the high school. And he was just chilling. And all of a sudden, like literally, he's sitting in the chair in the principal's office, and the police officer literally goes up to him and begins choking him and then puts him in a chokehold, just like out of the blue. And it's been shared almost 10 million times. That video gets shared 10 million times, and I could write the smartest piece on a solution, and if it got shared 1,000 or 2,000 times, I'd be excited. And some of that is that we live in a culture where nuts and bolts solutions, it's way more difficult to make them go viral than these videos. And so but I like the spirit of it. I mean, I wish, and we should always be thinking, how can, like, we can't be lazy with our solutions. And so we should be thinking creatively, and how can we make our solutions more known? I'll close the loop on that question with this thought. I ask people all the time, hey, describe for me the strategy of the Democratic Party to defeat Donald Trump. Okay, that response that's the same response I get everywhere I go. Awkward laughter. Because none of us, if there is a strategy, none of us know it. And here's the thing, a strategy is only as effective as it being known among the people. And so my point is that when we propose solutions and strategies, we have to make them known. And we're not doing a good enough job, and I put myself in that basket. We're not doing a good enough job making our solutions and strategies known.
Have two more questions before we have to wrap up. First, do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement has helped to frame other global issues like the connection between climate change and social justice, or the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean, or others? Has it helped to frame those in a different way?
Yes and no. Like, let me spend a few seconds even trying to define the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, there is an organization called Black Lives Matter, and it was started by 3 amazing organizing women, and that organization has chapters all across our country and around the world. And then there is also that phrase, the Black Lives Matter movement, was applied to more than just that organization. So the Black Lives Matter movement, the best way to understand that would be like the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was not an organization. The civil rights movement was a collection literally of nearly 1,000 different organizations and many movements in cities big and small all across America. So there's the Black Lives Matter organization, and they have a platform, and in their platform, they have many issues that resonate and identify all over the world, and like including issues of environmental injustice and the like. But then when you look at the greater movement called the Black Lives Matter movement, in that larger movement, there are hundreds of organizations, including organizations here in Portland, in my hometown of New York, and others, who are very much fighting for a wide variety of different issues and have found natural partners and allies. For instance, three women that I know really well are 3 of the founders of the Women's March, Linda Sarsour, Tamika Mallory, and Carmen Perez, all in New York. And I've just now gotten to know Bob Bland, one of the co-founders with them. And Tamika and Carmen and Linda, in some ways, people think of them as leaders inside, not of the Black Lives Matter organization, but of leaders in this larger movement. And those 3 women in particular are some of the best examples of women who are, very, very thoughtful about the pain and the problems beyond their own. And it's a huge reason why, I try to, so the women who founded the Black Lives Matter organization and the women who founded the Women's March, I like to say it like this, those 6 women, those are my leaders. I don't see them as, I see them not just as my peers, but those women I admire and look up to them and follow their leadership in a lot of ways. And they are, very much, aware that the more they can build partnerships and allies across disciplines and problems, the more we can get done. And so that's why the Women's March in Portland was amazing. And so they're still building that out. Notice our last question.
So our last question is from a student at one of the Title I schools, the Timberlake Job Corps. And that student asks, what is your personal definition of justice?
That's great. I think about that a lot because I spoke at a vigil last night for Jordan Edwards. And even while I was here, several people that are there in Dallas, like I kept getting texts. There are events even tonight in Dallas of people just standing up for Jordan and his family. And I had the thought, because I kept saying we need to fight for justice for Jordan and his family. And I had the thought, like that phrase makes sense. And then I had the thought, what is justice for Odell and Charmaine Edwards, the parents of Jordan? And I thought about, there's this familiar statue of the scale. And as she's holding the scales, like, I had the thought, there is nothing that we could do that could balance the scale for that family. Like, I sat down at the table with his family, and, like, they want the officer who killed Jordan to be arrested and charged and found guilty, and I want that. They want other officers who had gross misconduct there at the scene to also be fired and investigated. And if all of that happened, and they were all found guilty, and they all went to jail, and say the family got a large settlement where they were independently wealthy for the rest of their life, I looked Odell in the eyes, and Odell told me, he said, Shaun, I would trade all of that to have my son right here at the table right now. And what he was telling me was, what broke my heart, what he was telling me was, there will be no fair justice for what was done to his family. And that hurts. There are some wrongs that are so wrong that even if we do everything that we should do, you still can't make that right. Now, that does not mean that we fail in our fight for those other forms of justice. But when I think about justice, I do think about how can we hold people accountable, first off, and in holding people accountable, are there ways to improve the system so that it doesn't happen to someone else? And I arrived at that second part because what I found was a lot of families who got some type of justice. Somebody was arrested, somebody was fired, the family got a settlement, but then it just kept happening. And it kept happening and happening and happening. And as like for instance, I've become friends with the mother of Amadou Diallo, who was shot 41 times by police in New York in 1999. And his mother, Keriatu, is just an amazing, wonderful woman. And I spoke she hosted Amadou was shot 41 times. And that number 41 has haunted her. And this year, Amadou would have turned 41 years old. And so on his 41st, what would have been his 41st birthday, she held a birthday party in his honor. And so I was a speaker at the party. And she told me, like, one thing that bothered her was that all of these years later, I was a kid when I was a student when I fought against the NYPD for what they did to him. All of these years later, it's still happening. And so she has made it her business to fight for justice for other people. And what I got from her was justice is not just fixing it as best as we can for the family of Jordan Edwards. Justice is making it such that we try to make sure it never happens again. And we see far too little of that. And so we have a lot of temporary justice, Band-Aid justice, PR justice, and people deserve to have this deep systemic change that comes along with that. So that change is hard, but it's worth fighting for, and it starts locally. And I'll close with this thought, if that's okay. I don't think there's going to be much that we're going to get done nationally for the next few years. And I know that's not a deep thought, but I say that to say that a lot of what we've done over the past 10 years of organizing is fight, because we thought, hey, there's some people around in federal offices who will listen to us. So let's fight for these federal reforms and changes. And I'm not even saying you should completely stop fighting for that, but very little of it is going to get done. I think there's a much more efficient use of our time. Now, there are federal things that we often need to fight against, but there's a great opportunity for us to fight for deep, substantive, local change. And I'm seeing it happen. I've seen more local change happen in the few months of 2017 than I saw in the past 3 years of my activism combined, because a lot of local city leaders are now realizing, like, oh, we now have a much bigger responsibility than we ever understood in an Obama administration, for instance. And so there's an opportunity for all of you in the room who love Portland and love people to fight for some serious, significant, even I'll say revolutionary, radical changes so that Portland could be an example for the rest of the country. And we've seen some of that. I'm fighting with people in Seattle now. I know, Portland, I know you have like a love-hate relationship with Seattle. It's like you love Seattle, but it's like, yeah, okay, don't brag too much on Seattle, Shaun. You're in Portland. Well, I've been working with people in Seattle to fight for some serious local change there, and we're starting to win a little bit. And I would love for you all, for those, there are activists in the room now, and I love and appreciate you, and thank you for coming. And I wish that the masses of you would get behind local activists and their organizations to turbocharge their efforts to fight for meaningful local change. And it's possible. It's very possible. Thank you all so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Shaun King.